Hi, welcome back to Do Fix Differently. In today's episode, I want to talk a little bit about how to get the level correct in your specs in terms of how much time and energy you should invest in getting specs accurate, how much knowledge you should assume in terms of your readership. Those things I want to focus on today. Now, the first thing to say is that a lot of people who are writing API documentation, they struggle with, why am I even writing this in the first place? And I want to just explore those for a couple of minutes because I think it's relevant for the longer conversation. I see people who question API documentation really having two different drivers underneath them. Number one is actually the ability for them to support flexibility in their API. So typically banks do a lot of this stuff. If a customer can't quite code to their API as it's written, then they'll easily flex it on their side. They have a level of configurability that allows them to do that. And typically what that does is that says to them, well, you don't really need to exhaustively document the API because it's really a starting point for a conversation anyway. Now, we'll talk in other videos about why that is not strictly true, that actually customers do need a target API, even if you do it. But nonetheless, it's one of the reasons why people say, well, I'm not going to invest a huge amount of time. It doesn't really matter if it's slightly out of date. I can always flex it, can always fudge it later on. So that's one. The second one is actually kind of a more concerning one, which is a negative cycle that people get themselves into. They often recount a variation of a cycle that I like to call spray and pray. What this means is that people who receive your API documentation simply flick through it and say, fix 4.2. So I'm going to pick up my templates for fix 4.2 and spray them at your system. And then I'm just going to pray. I'm going to pray that they work. And when they don't work, when I get the error messages back, I'm simply going to fix those errors and I will develop through failure. So it becomes quite this sort of spray, pray, fix cycle during which people just develop and fix each one of the errors as they go. It's not a very efficient cycle in terms of development, to be honest with you, but it is also deeply demoralizing when people don't read the documentation that you've put out. People who get themselves into that negative cycle typically also say, well, I find myself constantly answering the same question again and again and again that's already written in the document. It's clear that they haven't read the document, so why am I bothering? So that's one of the reasons why people don't like API documentation. It's one of the reasons why nobody really wants this job of maintaining the documentation. But of course, we're here and we're trying to get people to write good quality documentation for their own sake, so we need to overcome that. So the way that I would encourage you to think about this is put yourself in the shoes of the reader for 1 minute. Typically, somebody like a software vendor, they're bombarded by a whole load of these documents. Normally, they're in PDF format. Normally, they're quite long. They are of varying different quality, frankly. They are of varying different accuracy for the reasons I just described. Some of them just have got fed up of trying to maintain it. And they're also normally quite long. To see documents of 80 pages up to about 150 pages is reasonably common. Some of that knowledge they'll already know, some of that knowledge they won't know. But I certainly don't want to read 150 pages working out what I do and don't know. So it's not a very pleasant job to be on the receiving end of so much documentation. The second thing is they really want things to be uniform. They want things to be uniform for their own sake, right? I'm a software vendor. I'm connecting out to loads of different venues. I want to look for the patterns between those venues. I want to try to standardize things as best I can to minimize the amount of reuse. And therefore, it's very natural for the readers to reach for those templates. In fact, it's exactly what you would expect them to do in many cases. They are trying to save themselves a job. Right? So if you find yourself in this situation that you find yourself a little bit frustrated that people aren't actually writing your documentation and they're using templates all the time, my advice is simply don't try to fight it. Just simply try to understand what's going on. Try to help them select the right templates in the first place. Okay. Investing in machine-readable documentation actually helps a lot here. And why is that the case? Well, first of all, it's structured. And so a human doesn't need to read 180 pages worth of documents. At least they have some sort of XML structure. Even if it's a brand new structure for them, it kind of doesn't matter all that much. At least it is structured for them. They don't have to read text and manipulate various different bits and bobs. Second of all, the structure of a lot of these formats, things like FinSpec or QuickFix, they give you the structure that you need to populate. So there's never really a question about completeness. If you don't fill out the machine readable document fully, then it won't compile, it won't pass validation. And so there is this guarantee of completeness that you get with machine readable documentation that isn't there when you're dealing with just free-form PDF documents. And thirdly, it's all about copy and paste, right? The customers want to do things as efficiently as they possibly can. They want to be able to just extract the information and paste it in somewhere else, perhaps into their code or something else like that, or run it through some sort of transformation logic that converts it into their code and into their own internal systems. Machine readable documentation does that. PDFs, Word documents are not really parsable in that same way. And so investing in machine readable documentation is really, really important in terms of helping customers, okay? But I started this off all about the level of knowledge that you need to address, okay? It's about where do you pitch these things? And there are some rules that I would lay out in terms of things that say you can go light on the human readable elements, or you can go a little bit heavier on the human readable elements. So first of all, think about who the reader is. If you're targeting vendors, then they are far more likely to have pre-built templates and they're going to reach for one of those off the shelves. If you're dealing with individual firms who are going to code to you individually, perhaps high frequency firms, hedge funds or something else like that, then those guys are less likely to have pre-built templates and are more likely to read your documentation, okay? And so if you're relying on the existence of these templates to avoid having to document things like, I don't know, log on, log off messages, then that might work with a vendor, but it might not work with somebody else. So think about who your audience are in terms of the jobs that they actually have, okay? Second thing is to think about your own workflow and whether you have standard workflows or non-standard workflows, okay? If you've gone off-piste and you've got some strange RFQ style model that uses new order singles and execution reports as opposed to the standard fix messaging, then that's something where you need to go a little bit more deep in terms of your describing your workflows. If you're using a standard simple limit order book model, central limit order book model, with order singles, execution reports, maybe you can skip some of that stuff and go a little bit lighter. Similarly, think about the asset class. So if you're dealing in something like equities, where fix has been around for a very long time, it's very well established and very, very well understood, you probably can lighten up on the amount of detail that you provide. If you're in a new asset class to fix, something like cryptocurrency, then it's probably better for you to just err on the side of explaining a little bit more rather than less. One thing that helps absolutely everywhere is examples. Examples, workflow, descriptions of workflow, diagrams, UML sequence diagrams around workflow. Those things really, really help people and will always help everybody, no matter how experienced they are or not in terms of understanding and connecting to your API. Okay, hopefully you found some interesting tips in there about how to pitch your documentation at the right user group. Depending on who the customer is, depending on the level of flexibility that you have. The key thing here is to try to understand the readership a little bit more, understand the problem they're going through and help them to code correctly to your API. This is a very difficult area and it's quite subjective. So if there's anything that we can do to help, please do reach out and talk to us. We're very happy to look at people's documentation, perhaps give you a few tips. We're not going to charge anybody for that. Please just kind of reach out and we'll be able to help you, okay? Tune in again next time for another Do Fix Differently.